Life has a way of playing cruel jokes on those who think they have it all. A year ago, I would have told you I was living the American dream. I had everything: a corner office in a gleaming Silicon Valley tower, a stunning home in Atherton, and most importantly, Jack Anderson as my husband. We were the perfect power couple, or so everyone said. I was the ambitious marketing executive who'd climbed the corporate ladder at Apple. Jack was the brilliant founder of a rising tech startup, on the verge of an IPO that would make us both obscenely wealthy. We met at Stanford, both bright-eyed students with dreams bigger than the Bay Area sky. He was the charming computer science major who'd rather code than party. I was the business student determined to break through Silicon Valley's glass ceiling. We fell in love over late-night study sessions and dreams of changing the world. After graduation, we built our careers side by side, supporting each other through every setback and celebration. When Jack proposed on a sunset sail under the Golden Gate Bridge, I thought my life was complete. For 8 years, we were unstoppable. Our wedding photos still hang in our marble-floored entryway, me in Vera Wang, him in Tom Ford. We hosted dinner parties for tech executives and venture capitalists. Our names appeared in Forbes 30 Under 30. Our Instagram feeds were perfectly curated snapshots of success. But perfection, I've learned, is often just an illusion waiting to shatter. The cracks started appearing slowly, almost imperceptibly. Jack began spending longer hours at his office, consumed by his company's upcoming IPO. Our dinner conversations revolved around valuation metrics and board meetings. The passion that once burned between us cooled to lukewarm companionship. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would return to normal after the IPO. That's when Blake Sterling walked into my life. I first met him at a charity gala at the Four Seasons. Jack was supposed to attend but canceled last minute, another board emergency. Blake was everything Jack wasn't: spontaneous, attentive, present. He listened when I spoke, really listened, not just nodding while checking emails. His steel blue eyes held mine across the crowded room. His smile promised adventures my structured life had forgotten. When he asked me to dance, I hesitated for just a moment. That hesitation should have been my warning. But his hand was extended, and the champagne had loosened my inhibitions. One dance turned into 2, then 3. We talked about art, travel, life beyond profit margins and market shares. He made me laugh for the first time in months. When he asked for my number, I gave it without thinking. It was just networking, I told myself. Blake was a venture capitalist, he could be useful for Jack's company. The text started innocently enough. Recommendations for art galleries, invitations to charity events. Each message Ade, my heart raced a little faster. Each response felt like a small betrayal. But I couldn't stop. Blake represented everything I'd lost in my pursuit of perfection. He took me to hidden jazz clubs in North Beach. We shared intimate dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. He remembered my favorite wine, my passion for modern art. While Jack canceled another date night, Blake was sending flowers to my office. I knew it was wrong, but I felt alive again. The guilt gnawed at me, but the thrill was intoxicating. Blake made me feel seen, desired, important. Not just as Jack Anderson's wife, but as Emma. The affair began on a rainy Tuesday in Napa Valley. Blake had invited me to preview a new winery he was investing in. I told Jack I was attending a marketing conference. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I spoke it anyway. Blake was waiting in his Tesla Model S, looking like a movie star in casual luxury. The drive-up was filled with easy conversation and lingering glances. The wine flowed freely, and so did our inhibitions. When he kissed me among the oak barrels, I didn't pull away. That night changed everything. One stolen afternoon became two, then weekly rendezvous. Blake had a private suite at the Four Seasons. We created our own world there, far from Silicon Valley's prying eyes. He showered me with gifts: a Cartier bracelet, Christian Louboutin heels. Each present came with a note that made my pulse quicken. I created elaborate lies to cover my tracks. Yoga classes that never happened. Girls' nights with friends who didn't exist. Business trips that were really weekends in Lake Tahoe. Jack was too preoccupied with his IPO to notice. Or maybe he didn't want to notice. Either way, our marriage became a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. We lived separate lives under the same roof. I told myself I deserved this happiness. That Jack had neglected me first. That Blake understood me in ways Jack never had. But deep down, I knew I was destroying everything I'd built. The facade began cracking 3 months into the affair. Blake started showing up at tech events where he knew Jack would be. He'd smirk knowingly, his eyes holding secrets that could destroy us. He'd make subtle comments that only I would understand. The thrill of our affair began to sour. I noticed things about Blake I'd overlooked before. The way he enjoyed making others uncomfortable. His casual cruelty to service staff. The calculated gleam in his eyes when he spoke about business deals. But I was in too deep to pull away. Blake had photos, texts, hotel receipts. He never threatened explicitly, but the implication was clear. I was trapped in a web of my own making. Then came the night that changed everything. Jack and I were supposed to celebrate our anniversary at Gary Danko. I'd spent hours getting ready, guilt and excitement warring in my stomach. But when I came downstairs, Jack was sitting in our living room. His face was ashen, a manila envelope in his hands. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked quietly. My world stopped spinning. The envelope contained photos Blake and me at various hotels. Receipts for jewelry I'd claimed were from female friends. Security camera footage from the Four Seasons lobby. Every lie, every betrayal, laid bare in harsh detail. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came. What could I say? How do you justify destroying someone who loved you completely? Jack didn't yell or rage. His quiet disappointment was worse than any anger. "I hope he's worth it," he said, standing to leave. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That sound echoed in my head for hours. I sat alone in our perfect house, surrounded by evidence of my betrayal. My phone buzzed, Blake asking where I was. I didn't answer. For the first time, I saw our affair for what it was. Not a grand romance, but a calculated destruction. I'd traded true love for cheap thrills. Destroyed a good man's trust for stolen moments of excitement. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Jack moved out to a hotel. His lawyer contacted mine. Silicon Valley's rumor mill worked overtime. Friends took sides, mostly his. I was the villain in their story, and rightfully so. Blake's true nature emerged once Jack was gone. His charming facade cracked, revealing something darker beneath. He became possessive, controlling. Showed up at my office unannounced. Called constantly, demanding to know my whereabouts. The romantic gestures turned into displays of ownership. I began to see what I'd been blind to before. Blake Sterling wasn't just a successful venture capitalist. He was a predator who'd marked me as prey. And I'd walked willingly into his trap. The gifts I'd thought were romantic now felt like chains. Every photo he'd taken was ammunition. Every secret I'd shared was a weapon in his arsenal. I was no longer his lover, I was his possession. And Blake Sterling protected what he considered his. Even as my world crumbled around me. Even as divorce papers arrived at my door. Even as my colleagues whispered behind my back. I couldn't escape his growing influence over my life. I'd given up everything for a man I was beginning to fear. A man whose smile no longer reached his eyes. A man who enjoyed watching me squirm. A man who was nothing like what he pretended to be. The perfect life I'd built was gone. Replaced by a nightmare of my own making. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. I never thought I'd find myself Googling how to escape an abusive relationship at 2 a.m. But there I was, in my empty Atherton mansion, searching for answers. The irony wasn't lost on me, I'd left a good man for a monster. Blake's true colors emerged like a slow-spreading poison. It started with small things, checking my phone when I wasn't looking. Questioning my every movement, every converse. The charming venture capitalist mask began to slip. Revealing something dark and calculating underneath. I discovered his pattern quite by accident. A chance meeting with a woman at a Palo Alto coffee shop. She recognized Blake's photo on my phone screen and turned pale. Her name was Sarah, and she had her own Blake Sterling story. Over cappuccinos that grew cold, she told me everything. How he'd swept her off her feet 3 years ago. The whirlwind romance, the expensive gifts. The gradual isolation from friends and family. Then came the financial manipulation. The emotional abuse, the threats. She'd lost everything, her savings, her home, her dignity. Blake had moved on to his next target, me. My hands shook as Sarah shared more names. Other women, other victims. A trail of destruction across Silicon Valley. Each story eerily similar to mine. Blake wasn't just a controlling boyfriend. He was a calculated predator with a playbook. And I was just his latest conquest. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd destroyed my marriage for a lie. Given up Jack's genuine love for Blake's manufactured charm. The shame was overwhelming. But shame wouldn't save me. I needed to be smarter than my fear. That night, I started gathering evidence. Screenshots of threatening texts. Records of gifts that were really chains. Dates, times, locations of his controlling behavior. I created a secure cloud account Jack had taught me to use. The irony of using his lessons to escape another man wasn't lost on me. Meanwhile, Blake's behavior grew more erratic. He'd show up at my office unannounced. Send hundreds of messages if I didn't respond immediately. His smile became predatory, possessive. "You're mine now," he'd whisper, grip too tight on my arm. "No one else will want you after what you did to Jack." He was right about one thing, I had destroyed my marriage. But I refused to let that mistake destroy me too. I reached out to Sarah and the other women. We met in secret, sharing stories and evidence. Each of us had pieces of the puzzle. Together, we built a picture of Blake's true nature. Bank records showing suspicious transfers. Evidence of market manipulation. A pattern of fraud hidden behind charm and threats. But Blake was powerful, connected. He had friends in high places. Friends who'd look the other way. Friends who'd believe his version over ours. We needed something bigger. Something that couldn't be ignored. That's when I remembered Jack's words about karma. About patience being the best revenge. I still had contacts in Silicon Valley. People who owed me favors. People who might help, despite my mistakes. I swallowed my pride and started making calls. Each conversation was an exercise in humility. Admitting my errors, asking for help. Some hung up immediately. Others listened, but remained skeptical. A few, though, offered to help. They'd seen through Blake's facade. Or had their own scores to settle. Slowly, carefully, we built our case. Every detail had to be perfect. Because Blake Sterling didn't make mistakes. Except for one, he'd underestimated us. Underestimated the women he'd discarded. Underestimated our determination. Our anger. Our need for justice. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. A fake investment opportunity too good to resist. A chance for Blake to prove his dominance. His ego wouldn't let him ignore it. I played my part perfectly. The adoring girlfriend, impressed by his business acumen. Stroking his ego while he walked into our trap. Each step carefully choreographed. Each detail meticulously planned. The other women provided crucial information. His patterns, his weaknesses, his blind spots. We knew he'd do his due diligence. But his arrogance would override his caution. The bait was too perfect, too tailored to his desires. A tech startup on the verge of a breakthrough. Desperate for funding but flying under the radar. The kind of deal that made careers in Silicon Valley. The kind of deal Blake couldn't resist. I watched him take the bait. Saw the gleam of victory in his eyes. He thought he was the predator. Never realizing he'd become the prey. The meeting was set at a private club in San Francisco. Blake arrived in his usual style, expensive suit, confident smirk. He didn't notice the SEC agents scattered throughout the room. Or the federal marshals posing as waiters. I wasn't there to see it happen. Didn't need to witness his downfall firsthand. The text messages told me everything. Blake Sterling was finally facing justice. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of fraud, manipulation, and deceit. All carefully documented and preserved. His empire of lies crumbling in real time. His arrest made the front page of TechCrunch. Silicon Valley VC charged with multiple counts of fraud. His smug mugshot a stark contrast to his usual polished image. The headlines kept coming. More victims stepped forward. More evidence emerged. The carefully crafted facade shattered completely. I watched it all from a distance. Each new revelation confirming what I already knew. I'd been fooled by a master manipulator. But I'd also helped bring him down. The other women became unexpected allies. Sisters forged in shared pain and redemption. We helped each other heal. Supported each other through the legal proceedings. Sarah found her voice again. Others reclaimed their stolen confidence. We were survivors, not victims. But the victory felt hollow sometimes. Especially late at night. When I'd walk through my empty house. Remembering what I'd lost. Who I'd lost. Jack had moved on, as he should. I'd seen photos of him with someone new. She looked kind, genuine. Everything I should have been. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Jack's signature already in place. No arguments about assets or property. He'd been more than fair. More than I deserved. I signed my name with a steady hand. Watching as my perfect life officially ended. But maybe that's what I needed. An ending to force a new beginning. A chance to rebuild. Not as Jack Anderson's wife. Not as Blake Sterling's victim, but as myself. Whoever that might be. The healing wouldn't be quick or easy. Trust in others and myself was a distant shore. But for the first time in months, I could breathe. They say time heals all wounds, but they never tell you how long it takes. Or how much work healing requires. A year after Blake's arrest, I was still putting my life back together. Piece by broken piece. I'd sold the Atherton house, too many memories haunted those halls. Moved to a smaller place in San Francisco's Hayes Valley. Away from Silicon Valley's endless networking events. Away from the whispers and judgmental stares. I'd left my job at Apple too. Couldn't face the pitying looks from colleagues. Or worse, the thinly veiled contempt. Instead, I started my own consulting firm. Small, but growing steadily. Helping companies with genuine innovation. Not just chasing the next big exit. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd found my true calling after losing everything. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come at the highest cost. Blake's trial was a media sensation. Silicon Valley loves nothing more than a fallen star. Especially one who'd fooled them all for so long. I testified, along with his other victims. Watched him sit there in his orange jumpsuit. His charm useless against hard evidence. 20 years in federal prison. Asset forfeiture. Restitution orders. Justice, by any legal definition. But closure? That's a different story entirely. Sarah and the others became true friends. We met monthly for dinner and wine. Sharing healing strategies and small victories. Supporting each other through nightmares and triggers. We called ourselves the Survivors Club. Finding strength in shared experience. Turning trauma into triumph. One Tuesday evening, during our monthly dinner, Sarah raised her glass with tears in her eyes. To freedom, she said. We all knew she meant more than Blake's imprisonment. Freedom from fear. Freedom from shame. Freedom to trust again. I saw Jack occasionally in the news. His company's IPO had been spectacular. Forbes called him Silicon Valley's next big thing. He'd married Rachel, the woman I'd seen in photos. They looked happy, genuine, real. It hurt, but not like before. More like an old injury in cold weather. A reminder of past mistakes. But no longer a crippling pain. I dated occasionally. Nothing serious. Trust came slowly, like ice melting. But it came. I learned to listen to my instincts. To spot the red flags I'd once ignored. To value substance over style. Character over charm. The nightmares became less frequent. Though they never completely disappeared. Dreams of Blake's controllee. Ing's smile. Of Jack's disappointed eyes. But I was stronger now. Scars tell stories. Mine taught me wisdom. One rainy Sunday morning, I ran into Jack at Blue Bottle Coffee. My heart stopped for a moment. Then started again, steady and sure. "Hello, Emma," he said simply. No anger in his voice. Just calm acceptance. We talked for an hour. About work, life, healing. He'd forgiven me long ago, he said. Hoped I'd forgiven myself too. I hadn't, not completely. But I was getting there. Rachel joined us eventually. No awkwardness, no tension. Just 3 adults sharing coffee and conversation. She was exactly as she seemed. Kind, intelligent, secure. Everything I pretended to be. everything I was learning to become. They invited me to their housewarming party. I declined politely, not ready for that step. But the invitation itself meant something. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just acceptance that the past is past. Life moves forward, ready or not. That evening, I walked along the bay, watching the fog roll in under the Golden Gate, thinking about choices and consequences, about love and betrayal, about redemption. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Another survivor had just left an abusive relationship. Needed support, guidance, hope. Could I help? I smiled as I typed my response. This was my purpose now. Using my mistakes to help others. Finding meaning in the mess I'd made. The sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of redemption. I wasn't the same woman who'd fallen for Blake's lies, or the one who'd betrayed Jack's trust. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone real. The perfect life I'd lost? It was an illusion anyway. Real life is messy, complicated, full of mistakes and lessons, triumphs and failures. But mostly, it's about choices. The ones we make. The ones we learn from. The ones that shape us. I chose wrong once. Devastatingly, horrifically wrong. But that choice led me here. To this moment of clarity. This hard-won wisdom. This authentic self. The survivors group keeps growing. Women helping women. Turning pain into purpose. Breaking the cycle of abuse. I share my story openly now. No more shame. No more secrets. Just truth. Raw, uncomfortable truth. That's the thing about rock bottom. Once you've hit it, survived it, you're not afraid anymore. You know your strength, your worth, your power. I still dream sometimes. Not nightmares anymore. But dreams of possibility. Of love built on truth. Of trust earned slowly. Of happiness that's real. Not perfect. But real. And that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. End.